Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is author James McBride, whose powerful memoir of his extraordinary mother, The Color of Water, was on the New York Times bestseller list for over 2 years. McBride has since written 3 novels, most recently a fiction about Captain John Brown, the good Lord bird, which won the National Book Award, and a cultural biography of soul singer James Brown, Kill 'Em and Leave. Please join me here at the Alabama Booksmith as I speak with author James McBride. Well, Mr. McBride, you're having a busy day.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Good of you to take some time out. You're going to give some talks later, sign some books.
Yeah, I'm at my it's one of my favorite bookstores, one of my favorite booksellers. You know, I really enjoy coming to Alabama.
That's great.
Never thought I'd say that, but there it is.
Well, you're new to Bookmark, and our viewers won't have seen you on this show. So I want to talk about the book that really put you on the map in a big way, The Color of Water, the extraordinary memoir of your extraordinary mother. It was on the bestseller list for 2 years and more.
Right.
And you couldn't possibly not sit around and say, I wonder why that happened. I wonder what I did. I wonder how I can do it again. What do you think? I know it's slightly narcissistic, but what do you think captured so many readers over a period of more than 24 months?
Well, my mother was the kind of mother that most mothers would relate to. I mean, most mothers, you know, whatever their race and whatever their religion and cultural background, want the same thing for their kids. They want their kids to do well, and they want their kids to, in general, I suppose, you know, worship God and go to school, get a good education. And my mother was very strict, and there was no room for nonsense, you know. It was all about education, it was about church, and I think a lot of people related to that. And also they relate to the love that she had for her children.
Your mother had 12 children.
That's a lot.
And
she said they drop like eggs after a while. They just like, you know.
And you were in Red Hook, Brooklyn most of the time, Red Hook section.
Well, first of all, my mother began her life as a Jewish person.
Yeah.
And she married my father in 1941, and then she ended up in Harlem. They lived there for, I think, 10 to 12 years, then Red Hook, and then St. Albans, Queens. And during that time, my father died and my stepfather passed away, and she had to raise these kids. She converted to Christianity, but she had still a lot of her childhood, you know, love of education, love of religion, and she kind of pushed that onto us. So we really were a kind of inclusive group, and we weren't allowed to socialize too much with people outside of school or church. You know, we had to come in before dark. She was very strict. You know, she had a belt that she used that was like thunder and lightning. You didn't want that, you know. And if she got you, she got you. And then she got one. Sometimes she went and got the other for something that she forgot to get them for before. And you know, she was very disorganized, but the house was always a place of books and reading, you know, no television, that kind of thing.
It's extraordinary when you when you talk with people our age, as compared to, say, people now 21, 25 years old. The whole idea of any corporal punishment now seems anathema, and yet we were raised in another era.
You know, it's not the punishment; it's who delivers it and why. You know, we live in an era now where if you slap your kid upside the head in the mall somewhere, somebody will take a cell phone and film it, and it'll be on the internet. And you can destroy a person's reputation now in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I don't think my mother could raise 12 kids and send them to college now, no matter what because the world is so different. You know, our moral compass has gotten so skewed that it's sort of like the N-word is kind of, you know, verboten, but the word poverty is not. I'd rather the N-word be legal and not verboten, and the word poverty be something that people, you know, can't say because it's so horrible. So some of this stuff is just puff and cake ice, and some of it's real, But I was just raised in a no-nonsense house where you had to deliver.
There are images in The Color of Water. By the way, The Color of Water is not skin color exactly. The color of water is...
It was the color of God. When I was a boy, I asked my mother, what color is God? She said he's the color of water.
It's a great title because you have to learn it as you go along.
Well, it's not when she said it wasn't like,
No.
Then she just threw it off as a comment. In other words, be quiet, and God's the color of water now, pick up that bag and bring it over,
You paint pictures in that first book of your mother on a bicycle, the only white person in sight, riding down the street sidewalk on a bicycle. She must have had an odd, isolated, and yet in other ways connected life in an all-black neighborhood.
Well, I thought she was odd. Even when I was a boy,
Uh-huh.
I thought she was weird, and I was very embarrassed by her. But on the other hand, she was respected by most of the mothers in our community because we live in a working class community, and she did things with her kids that people respected. The kids were clean, they went to church, and at night it was dangerous for her. On the other hand, it was dangerous for any woman walking home from work at late at night. But yeah, she was always, the thing was that like I knew of nobody else's mother who rode a bike.
Yeah, right.
And it was an old-fashioned, the bike would be worth $600, $700 now. It was like, it had a horn on the frame, and it was just oh my God, it was horrible,
Right. All books are collections of choices. One of the choices that you made in The Color of Water was to put your interviews with your mother in her voice in the interchapters. And I think it was the right choice because her voice, you interviewed her. Did you do it on audio tape?
Oh, I used everything.
Yeah.
I used everything.
And you put them separate. You put them as separate, as discrete interchapters.
That wasn't my idea, actually. I actually wrote the book in her voice all the way through.
Uh-huh.
And then and nobody would publish it. So I gave it to an editor named Cindy Spiegel, who actually edited the last book, the James Brown book, the most recent book. And Cindy said, this is good, but you need to include yourself in it. So I included, so all of my chapters are based on the life chapters that she created. So it was really like 2 books in one. And it wasn't easy to do because I was happy to trot her out there, but then I had to put my own, my own malaise to the page. Wasn't that,
Are you a shy person?
I wouldn't say I used to be very shy.
Mm-hmm.
But now, having sold books for 20 years, I've learned to just to sort of just put on the face. I'm a private person, and I'm not really I'm waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and say, okay, you got to leave now, big time. You got to get out, and I'll say thank you very much. I'm an unassuming person, and so I wasn't really crazy about putting my story. I didn't think my story was that unique, frankly.
Well, you put your story into Color of Water. You put your story later into telling the James Brown story.
I had to, though.
Yes.
I was forced to do it.
Mm-hmm.
When I got to the James Brown book, the bones had been licked so clean. There was nothing left to say unless you could say it in a different way,
Well, we'll get there. Do you feel Jewish at all?
I don't even know what that word means,
I think it means whatever you decide.
Well, the answer is no, but I don't feel Christian either. I'm a human being. Those labels don't mean anything to me. When I see Jewish people, like for example here in the South, surviving, I know their struggle was more than what people see.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to Germany, I'm aware that I'm walking through a Jewish cemetery. And when I hear of anti-Semitism that happens like in Europe and France, I'm aware that there's a lot more anti-Semitism in the world than people really know.
Reading The Color of Water, I thought this book surely benefits from Obama's presidency. What? But it was written before.
It was written before
Obama
became president.
Absolutely.
And I've never been one of these people that walks around being the head of the mixed race club, because we're all mixed.
Mm-hmm.
The Irish are mixed with the Italians, and the Germans are mixed with the Swedes. And I mean, it's almost like it's like the new thing now. It's a new trend to be mixed. I mean, what difference does it make? I really don't see. I just don't see any difference. It's just I don't waste my time with it. Just tell me a dirty joke and let's eat some ribs, and then we, later on, if you want to have a committee meeting about it, that's the time I'm heading home.
I don't.
No, I mean, of course not.
You chose, after a couple of different directions, 2 novels, St. Anna and what's the other?
Song Yet Sung.
Song Yet Sung. You chose to write a fictionalized account, so to speak, of Captain John Brown. You took a very traditional. You used a very traditional structure, in that you don't tell the story from the point of John Brown. You tell it from the point of view of a small, unimportant person next to. Like, you don't tell the story of Napoleon, you tell the story of Napoleon's valet who watches Napoleon. You have 2 questions. What attracted you to the John Brown story and Harper's Ferry, and why a 12? Does he start off as 12?
He starts
Henry,
as an 11 or 12-year-old boy. Yeah.
And then you run him along 3-4 years there.
Right. Well, I visited Harper's Ferry.
Uh-huh.
And I was just blown away by the historical value of what I was seeing. And then I began to read about John Brown, who was, an abolitionist from Connecticut who was against slavery and who saw African Americans as human beings, and then, led this revolt against the government. I just was fascinated with him, and I wanted to tell a book. I wanted to write a book that I would read and tell a story that was funny. Mm-hmm. And give, one of the problems in our country is that we don't know how to talk about race without somebody getting pissed off. People get mad. So I wanted to talk about it in a way that would be comfortable for people, and allow people to see the spaces that are difficult, and in a way that was entertaining. And John Brown was really, really an entertaining character. I mean, it's my favorite book.
Well, why did you choose to take the story to 413 pages? There's an epic dimension to The Good Lord Bird that is your doing, because the actual Harper's Ferry doesn't come along until the last 100 pages. You spend the bulk of the book out west, Kansas, Missouri. And there's a choice there. You wanted to get a bigger canvas. You wanted to get a bigger spread, an epic spread. Why did you do that?
I'm not really sure. In novels, you just follow the characters. They kind of push the thing along. I don't really like books that are too long. On the other hand, when I read Moby Dick, the last 3 chapters of Moby Dick are probably the most exciting piece of fiction you ever want to read. Mm-hmm. But and Moby Dick has got to be 800 pages. I mean, it's a very long book. And the first part of it, you're basically just being set up for the end. Yeah. I reread Moby Dick long after I wrote The Good Lord Bird, but what Melville did was probably something that I unconsciously aped, which was, you're setting up the big moment so the reader has, right. So you're sucking the reader to the end. You
make your speaker, Henrietta, he's mixed race boy dressed as a girl. Right. Now, there's an extra dose there, having him wear a dress for 5 years. Why did you choose to have him disguised as a little girl?
Well, initially I wanted Henry, who disguised as a girl, plays as Henrietta. I really wanted him to be a girl, but I just didn't feel confident enough to create that kind of character. Once the character, I knew that I had the voice in my head, and the voice was talking as an old man. And so I just had to figure out a way to make him or her, because I really wanted to show some of the distances that existed between men and women and blacks and whites and girls and women and so forth. Right. So I didn't feel confident enough to write it about him as a girl.
But I heard, in the best way, a lot of times if you tell authors you hear anyone else's voice, they think you're accusing them of stealing. You're not stealing. I could show you pages that are in the style of Mark Twain, and I can show you dialogue in your book that sounds very much like Huck Finn. And this is a good thing, by the way.
Well, I mean, you know, it doesn't hurt my feelings to compare me to Mark Twain, that's for sure. But I'm no Mark Twain. I mean, you know, you got, Mark Twain was he was the subway. I'm the guy who pays the token to get on to ride and gets off at 59th Street.
Well,
but you know, the voice of a character. Look, Southern dialogue is so rich. You know, it's just the richest of all American dialogues. If you can get a handle on it, you know.
You, in the course of Good Lord Bird, we're going to watch this. This is going to be fun. In the course of Good Lord Bird, you say a number of different times, it doesn't matter what blacks look like. Whites can't see them anyway. They're invisible. And that reminded me, of course, as it must, readers, of Ellison's notion in Invisible Man, that the black American walking around is a sheet of glass, that a lot of white people don't see him at all. Now here's the turn for you. James Brown didn't want to be seen. He didn't want to be seen by, he was wearing the mask. He's not Ralph Ellison. He's Paul Laurence Dunbar. He is a different creature there. You've got one notion of invisibility in Good Lord Bird, and then another notion of, in a sense, blocking off understanding in Kill 'Em and Leave. What do you think about that?
I think that's fascinating. I think part of the reason behind that is that James Brown was a Southerner.
Mm-hmm.
And in the South, you know, I mean, I'm talking out of turn. I'm just talking about what I learned. You know, everyone kind of stays in their own lane. And it's been that way for the last 2 or 3 centuries. And so he was more of in my opinion, he was more of a Southerner than he was a black man. And in the South, everyone stays in their own lane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because by dint of his success and his circumstance, and by dint of things that he did that weren't cool, he veered out of his lane and he became known for this or known for that. He was known to be a great singer. He was also known to be like a woman abuser, a drug addict, and he was, you know, changed American music, but you know, he couldn't figure the guy out because he would veer out of his lane and go into the ditches. Not only would he veer out, he'd just hit the ditches and he had to be pulled out and put back on the road. So he didn't want people to know who he was because there was part of him that was ashamed and part of him that just wanted to be proper. That's how it is down here. Proper, you know.
There were 14 previous biographies of James Brown. You said.
Yeah.
And so you had to, not only did you have to dig hard and find resources that hadn't been found before, but you also had to put yourself into the book a little bit. All perfectly legit. But I learned a lot about take the quantity of the thing. 321 albums, 45 gold records, 832 songs he wrote.
Oh, he was prolific.
How did he do that?
Well, he worked all the time. They didn't call him the hardest working man in show business for nothing. And down here in the South, you know, in my travels, I have met many, many white people who saw James Brown back in the day.
Yeah.
He was huge down here. I don't know about in the North. I don't know who went to see him up in Yankee country, but down here, he was very popular. And I think what it is that he was so good, his music was so powerful that people never really thought too much about what went on behind the looking glass because his music was so infectious. And it was so, at the time, and to some degree now, still quite revolutionary and innovative. So
you had at one point, I was a little surprised. I mean, you're a professional musician, saxophone player,
right,
composer, and at one time you had a few in the James Brown. You had a couple of harsh words for rap, for the cultural message, for the social message.
Well, I think rap as an art form is the greatest art form to emerge from America in the last 40 years. But you know, the music has been eaten up by the industrial strength recording industry. So you have these young kids talking about, you know, shooting each other and killing each other over whiskey and beer and you know, over sneakers and beating up women and, you know, don't tell nobody. I mean, you know, the ignorance that is promoted in rap music is not how rap music began. Rap music really began as a kind of community project that kept kids See, when they cut out music in the New York City public schools in the 70s, kids who were normally carrying home clarinets and trumpets didn't have them to carry home anymore. So they had to figure out something else to do. So they figured out they would take these records and they would make these scratching noises and they would make music like that. They would plug them into light poles and stuff, and they had parties with a DJ who admonished the people to stay in school and respect women and so forth. And it just became, after a while, the DJs disappeared. And now it's all, and then you got after a while, the actual the turntable DJs disappeared, and it's just about the guy with the mic. And now it's just about the guy with the mic. So that part of the craft has changed enormously.
I was pained to read how hard James Brown rehearsed his bands. And I thought, I read it and I thought, these guys are being tortured. I'd never seen anything like it. He kept them for hours. He exhausted them. They were like prisoners at hard labor, but they didn't quit either.
Well,
is that normal?
The cruelty of the music business, I mean,
it had to be perfect.
The cruelty of the music business, no one is more privy to it than black musicians, really. And I should say that two of James Brown's principal creators were from Alabama, Mobile. Bernard Odom was from Mobile, Alabama, and Fred Wesley, his trombonist, who wrote a lot of James Brown's hits. But, you know, the music business is not easy for musicians, no matter what your color. And there are not enough jobs, and if a guy doesn't like you, he just gets rid of you, gets someone else. But the way he rehearsed his band, you couldn't do that now, no matter what. Musicians wouldn't put up with it, and whatever union exists would holler and scream. But in those days, he was such a star. And also, James Brown loved music, and the musicians with him, they loved music as well.
But those marathon sessions deep into the night, oh my God. Kill him and leave. He never hung around after the show for, I guess, autographs and adulation, but he did get his hair done.
Yeah, well.
For a couple of hours?
Oh yeah, he would sit under the hairdryer for like 2 or 3 hours after the show, because he never wanted someone to see him improper. You know, it was always about being proper.
And then I thought, all right, well, that's nice. Kill him and leave. More people should do that. Then the rumble in the jungle, the fight in Zaire. They're all there, and Mobutu decides, he lets it be known somehow, there's a rumor, that if you will wait around afterwards.
He'd give you a bag of diamonds, yeah. And James Brown, after he finished his performance, he got up and he went to the airport and he went home.
No bag of diamonds.
No bag of diamonds. No, James Brown didn't take handouts from people. He was a very proud man. He didn't do sneaker or beer commercials. I mean, his marriages, toward the end of his life, his marriages were a mess, and that's really what drove him into drugs. At a middle age, I mean, this guy never did drugs until he was in his late 40s, early 50s.
He was kind of a clean liver, really, most of the time.
He was a clean-living man.
Yeah.
But his life began to fall apart. You know, his records stopped selling, and he became an oldies act, basically.
Yeah. If I had a strict rule for myself, kill him and leave, I would have broken it once in Zaire. For a small bag of diamonds.
Well, you know, if you knew what Mobutu had done, you probably wouldn't have.
James Brown and money. I was astonished in your book to learn how much money the man earned and what a paranoid relationship he had with money. A couple of the oddities under the carpets.
Oh yeah, he would do crazy stuff. Yeah,
tell me about that. People are interested
he
in
would do crazy stuff with money. Like he would take $10,000 and stick it under the rug in a hotel in San Francisco, and then come back months later and pick up his money. You know, peel the rug back and take. He carried $3,000. He would carry cashier's checks of $3,000 in his wallet because that was under the IRS radar and so forth. But there's a reason for that.
Yeah, what?
The reason was, first of all, when he was young, his family was displaced by the Savannah River nuclear site, which moved 8,000 families. The government just basically came in and just took 360 square miles of land. So that whole business of the government can just take whatever they want was something that was in his head. He'd been cleaned to the walls by the IRS twice. And he had all these people who needed money, who depended on him. Mm-hmm. And also he was so poor when he was young, I guess he never wanted to fall back to that, he was part of that generation that kept their money stuffed in their mattress.
Well, the banks had failed in 33,
That's right,
34. I mean, it wasn't,
yeah.
that was not a myth. I have a grandfather who had money in the bank, and one day the bank was closed in Yonkers.
Wow.
And but those checks he used to speak of in his wallet, they were $3,000 each. He had, he had wads of them that he carried around with him.
Oh, he had 2 cardboard boxes in his house. He had a red room in his house, called it the red room.
Right.
He had 2 cardboard boxes full of. His accountant never could figure out where that money came from. But look, a lot of these stars are fun. As a musician, I've seen how some of these stars are about the money. They need cash. They don't want any fancy figuring. They've been burned by the industry so much. And the fact is that when he died, the man left all of his money to poor people.
Tell me about that. He said, my will is going to be a mess. And it turns out it is.
It is a mess.
What's going on there?
Well, when James Brown died, he left everything, all his music, his publishing, his likeness, to a trust to educate poor white and black children in South Carolina and Georgia. And he was very specific about that. Poor children, no matter what their race. He set up a trust, and it was attacked almost within hours after his death by some of his children, some of his named children, and his last wife. And has been tied up in court in South Carolina for 10 years. You're talking about 48 lawsuits, 4,000 pages of testimony, 90 attorneys, most of whom never even knew James Brown. And they just bill each other. They just fight about it, and they bill each other and pay each other through his estate, through his money, through his publishing and his music that continues to earn money.
It is Jarndyce and Jarndyce, isn't it? It's Dickens.
It's horrible.
It's fantastic.
Really well, I mean, that's why in many ways James Brown's life is a metaphor for America now. We have all these, where is our moral bar? We set moral bars where they are, where someone can get the highest percentage, and that's where the moral bar lives. I mean, any decent person would say, I would think, that these poor children in South Carolina and Georgia, these are our future, no matter what they look like. And we expect them to compete with kids from Japan and China and Europe, and they need education. The money is there, and lawyers are paying themselves. I'm at the point now where I don't know if I'll ever do nonfiction again. Because this book researching the history of James Brown has soiled my innocence to see these well-coiffed dress lawyers with shiny shoes taking this money and just looking at you like it's nothing. I mean, I guess I'm naive because I just think it's so wrong,
Well, I don't think anybody would dispute it. And I am delighted that you're going to go back to writing novels.
I can't wait. I mean, I've started already, but fiction allows your dreams to come true, and you spend time with people that you really like. You don't have to travel, and no one's asking you for money, and people are not trying to hustle you and con you and say, I'll do an interview with you, but my lawyer must be present.
You can sit in your room and imagine it.
Well, you got to do the research first. But it's a lot easier to research a novel than it is to research a nonfiction book.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I've enjoyed the fiction of yours that I've read very much, and I'm looking forward to the next. And I certainly thank you for spending time here today with me.
Well, thank you. Delighted.